We are on.
Okay. Okay, doing one more sound check. Can everyone hear me properly?
Yeah. We can.
Okay. Okay. Good morning. Thank you everyone for joining. Welcome to Boston Study Group's Ambedkar Lecture Series. We are delighted to have you all join our special lecture series, which is dedicated to honoring the life and legacy of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Dr. Ambedkar, born into a marginalized community, he overcame formidable barriers to become the chief architect of the Indian Constitution, championing the cause of social equality, justice, and the rights of the oppressed. His prolific writings, speeches, and activism still continue to serve as a guiding beacon for those dedicated to building an inclusive and just society. This lecture series is designed to explore the various dimensions of Dr. Ambedkar's legacy. This series dwells into various topics surrounding constitutional rights, anti-caste struggles, Dalit empowerment, gender equality, social and economic justice, and shedding light on the relevance of Dr. Ambedkar's teachings in today's context. Before we start our lecture, I would like to give a brief introduction about Boston Study Group. Boston Study Group is a nonprofit registered with the IRS under 501(c)(3) and an Ambedkarite organization in the New England, USA area, dedicated to working towards a just and equitable society. We organize study groups, monthly meetings, lecture series, and other social activities in the Boston area to create educational and organizing infrastructure to carry forward our mission. Our membership is composed of individuals, families, students, scholars, academics, and workers who share our vision of equality and upliftment of people. We are particularly interested in creating support structures and working with students from historically marginalized backgrounds. We are inspired by those who worked for human welfare, from Buddha and Sant Ravidas to Savitribai, and Jyotiba Phule to Periyar and Dr. Ambedkar. With that being said, I think we can get started with today's lecture. So the format of the lecture would be 30 to 40 minutes of lecture by a guest speaker. That will be followed by a 30 minutes Q&A session. So our guest speaker for today is Sephora Josh. Sephora, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to be here today with us. We are very delighted to have you here. So to give a brief introduction about Sephora to everyone in the audience. Sephora is a doctoral research scholar in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur. Her research documents and analyzes the cultural texts of enslaved Dalit communities in Kerala to understand their anti-caste politics. She was awarded the Bluestone Rising Scholar Prize 2023, instituted by Brandeis University, and Caste, a global journal on social exclusion, for a research paper on Dalit historiography. It is titled as When Fists Write the Past, Conceptualizing Dalit Historiography Through the Cultural Productions of Dravida Varga Aikya Munandi. Sephora, we are very honored and grateful to have you here. And without much further ado, I would request you to take over the session.
Thank you, Monali, for the introduction. And thank you so much for calling me for giving this talk. It's a great honor for me as an early career scholar to talk as part of the Ambedkar Lecture Series. And I hope this talk, through this talk, I'm paying respect to Ambedkar and all his efforts, and also all the people who have participated in various ways in this mission of challenging or annihilating caste. So today's talk, I have titled it as Dalits and Livelihood, Confronting Caste Materiality. In this talk, I'm particularly talking about the materiality of caste. But before going deeper into the subject itself, I would like to give a very brief context of where I'm coming from. So this talk, I developed this talk through my readings, which I did as part of the study group, a Dalit study group, which we formed in our campus a couple of years ago. And also my personal academic readings also kind of helped me to grapple with this concept of caste materiality. And from whatever readings I've been doing for the past couple of years regarding caste and anti-caste resistance within Dalit studies, I understood that Dalit studies understands caste primarily in two ways. The dominant strand within Dalit studies looks at caste from an ideological lens, critically engaging with how caste is created and perpetrated using the idea of purity pollution. So in this discourse, caste is understood as something. Uh, Caste is understood as created using Brahmanical knowledge. Therefore, there are attempts to challenge Brahmanical discourses such as Brahmanical history, myths, Brahmanical Hindu scriptures, Vedic knowledge, and even Brahmanical history for that matter. So, and this framework understands caste, the structure of caste as graded hierarchy, where it talks about infinitely divided ranks, where each rank would be divided into various subcastes, and it talks about endogamy uh, as a practice, or marrying within the caste as the practice which perpetuates caste system, by highlighting how endogamy perpetrates the idea of ritual purity. And in this discourse, which is the dominant discourse in Dalit studies, there is a lot of emphasis on the formation of Dalit consciousness as an antidote to caste system. It argues that Dalits and the lower caste, because they are ascribed this lower position within the caste system, they come together so that they can challenge. They create this Dalit consciousness or anti-caste consciousness so that they can challenge the caste system. However, differently from this particular strand of thought, which talk about the ideological aspects of caste, there is a different strand which talk about caste in materialist terms, in material terms. So, in the materialist understanding of caste, caste is understood fundamentally as embedded in unequal material relations, and which is then perpetrated and legitimized through ideological structures. So, in this discourse, you can see a clear change in the vocabulary itself, the concerns itself. So this discourse would emphasize on unequal land relations, labor relations, inequality, spatial marginalization, discrimination, lack of access to resources, lack of ownership of resources, etc. And in this discourse, unlike the ideological discourse which talk about Dalit consciousness, this discourse focuses on the redistribution of resources because it understands caste as a system embedded in material inequality. It identifies the redistribution of resources as the means to challenge caste system fundamentally. However, although these two strands exist within Dalit studies, we need to understand that these are not really mutually exclusive, but it should enable us to understand caste in a more comprehensive way, where we see caste as a system rooted in material inequality or unequal material relations, which are then perpetrated and legitimized using ideological forces like religion, and which manifests in the social realm in the form of graded hierarchy. So, since uh, since we since I just mentioned that caste manifests in the social realm in the form of graded hierarchy, I thought in order to understand the roots of the caste system, we have to start from how caste manifests in the social hierarchy and then trace it backwards. So I thought we can talk about we can see how the caste violence as or caste atrocities as one of the most obvious and undeniable way in which caste manifests in the social realm, and what are its implications. Anand Teltunde, in his book The Persistence of Caste, does a very extensive sort of analysis about various caste atrocities that have been happening in the country for a very long time. And in this book, he particularly focuses on the Khairlanji massacre, which happened in Maharashtra. So Teltunde says that caste system uses violence as a tool to perpetrate it. So he says that violence is used not only as a tool to punish those who break caste norms, but also it is used as a tool to enforce positions of superiority and reiterate positions of superiority and domination. When he analyzes the particular caste atrocity in Khairlanji, he talks about the Dalit family which was murdered after gruesome tortures, both sexual and other kinds of tortures. These four people in a family got murdered. And he says he attributes three particular characteristics or qualities to this family. And he says that one is that they owned a few acres of land. And second, they had access to education. Third, they were Ambedkarites. So the particular positionality of or the conditions of that particular family is not really in agreement with the expected caste norms, which provoked an entire Shudra population to inflict this kind of a ghastly violence on the people on this particular family. So the Khairlanji massacre, in a way, compels us to rethink the idea, and it questions the idea, the popular idea, that material advancement in itself translates to caste mobility, and it also problematizes the assumption of solidarity based on identity, because in the popular understanding, we think that because Dalits and lower castes are ascribed this particular lower position in the hierarchy, it automatically translates into solidarity between them. But Teltumde questions that understanding itself, because he is talking about the Shudra people, the lower caste, inflicting violence on the Dalits. And this understanding of caste as a system with fundamentally material underpinnings, it animates or it gravitates towards a shift in understanding caste from the idea of understanding caste in terms of a binary of upper caste versus lower caste to one that of dominant caste versus Dalits, where dominant caste would mean the resourceful caste and Dalits would mean the resourceless. And since we established that caste has fundamentally material underpinnings, now we need to understand what exactly do we mean by the materiality of caste. So the word materiality itself, I mean the concrete aspects of everyday living, which is primarily constituted by land and labor relations. And in this slide, I have tried to put in various pictures which force this idea of materiality of caste into your eyes, because you can see land and labor, how exploitation happens, like how people are dispossessed of land, like all these aspects. I think these pictures bring forth this particular idea of the materiality of caste, and I will be talking in detail in the coming slides about what exactly do I mean by that. Land being the most important productive natural resource, access to land or control over land is inseparably linked to caste power. The more control you have on material resources, the more caste power you would have, or vice versa. So if you look at various origin theories of caste, irrespective of the differences, whether it be Aryan migration theory, which talks about migration and settlement of the Aryans in the subcontinent, or that of Aryan invasion theory, which talks about the one time coming and invading of the indigenous population, or whether we look at Ambedkar's theory of the broken man, where he talks about the origin of untouchability. In all these origin narratives, land and dispossession occur as the central, common aspect. And Ambedkar talks about it in detail, where he says that when the society moved from a nomadic to settled life in the wake of an agrarian economy, land was the most important resource, and there were tribal conflicts, intertribal conflicts to procure more land and more land for cultivation. And the tribes which could procure more land became dominant. And their domination also created, on the flip side, a subjugated population who were then exploited. So in the theory of broken men, Ambedkar says that these people who were dispossessed of their land and scattered, whom he calls as this broken men, scattered from their community, they are assigned the task of protecting the land or guarding the land from external attacks, and therefore they were located. They were assigned the duty. So they were located at the borders, the margins of the land, and they had to do this labor in return, they used to get dead cattle meat for their food. So this was the plight. And when we talk about dispossession, we need to understand that dispossession is not something which happened in the past and it is not happening anymore. But dispossession is a continuing mechanism, and the unabated survival of caste in the contemporary times uh, kind of tells us that dispossession is also a continuing mechanism through which caste relations are perpetrated. Therefore, it compels us to understand dispossession not as a primitive mode of accumulation, but as Judith Whitehead calls it, is the mode of primary accumulation. And in this process, state is also an active agent. The state is also an active agent in process of dispossession, whether it be through enforcing, whether through direct brute force, or to or through giving compensation, or persuading the people. State is always an active agent to get compliance from the dispossessed. And this clearly says that, I mean, indicates that the intersection of caste-based agrarian relations on the exclusionary growth paradigms of neoliberalism can only reproduce and expand the existing socio-economic inequalities. So if you look at the current, land distribution status in the country, also you see that the Dalits are the ones who possess least amount of land, and moreover, they are the ones who are more vulnerable to lose land. So whenever a development project comes, Dalits are more likely to lose land. And even when dispossession happens, even when it affects people from other communities, Dalits are the most affected because the non-Dalits would have better hoarding power, or because of the endowment effect, thanks to their social relations, they are more equipped to deal with dispossession, whereas Dalits are not. They are the least equipped to deal with dispossession. So now we have to look at another kind of land relation, how land is regulated, how land relations are regulated using caste, which would bring the idea of control or regulation of access to common resources. Silvia Federici defines commons by the existence of a shared property in the form of a shared natural or social wealth, lands, waters, forests, systems of knowledge, capacities for care, to be used by all commoners without any distinction, but which are not for sale. And this definition of the commons that Federici gives indicates that commons are there to ensure that everybody in the society gets access to at least subsistence means of their survival. And when caste intersect with the idea of commons itself is susceptible to be to more regulations based on the caste power. And control of access to resources is mainly done in several ways, which I have kind of listed down in the slide. First one is encroachment. When we talk about encroachment, it can happen directly and indirectly. And most of the times, the dominant caste encroach into the common lands using their political clout. And when there is dissent, when there is resistance from the Dalits against this kind of encroachment, they are often treated with violence. For instance, the Dalit women would be sexually harassed. Dalit men would be, brutally attacked, and they're even treated with social eviction or social boycott. That the dominant caste will not buy their dairy products, for instance. So things like that happen. And also the state also encroaches into common land without giving compensation to the land. So state also does that often. And next is an indirect way of encroachment through manipulative bidding, because the 1961 Common Land Regulation Act gives the Dalits, I mean, it reserves 1/3 of the common land under the management of the panchayat to Dalits. But so every year the panchayat has to conduct auctions where the Dalits are given the chance to bid in the auction. So if they can, bid the highest amount, they'll get the right to cultivate in the land. So the dominant caste, using their material and social power, they get a proxy Dalit candidate who is then used to get this right through auction, get the right to cultivate through the auction. So they manipulate the auction process itself and get the right to cultivate in the land and thereby prohibit or block Dalits from using common lands. And another way in which the access to common resources is regulated is through the enclosure of land. The idea of enclosure is first introduced by the colonial government in the name of systematizing land relations and protecting natural resources. But what it effectively did is it removed the people's right to common resources, which they were using for their subsistence, survive for the survival, and it removed people from these natural resources, and by vesting a lot of arbitrary power on the with the state, a lot of power with the state. And what it effectively does, in addition to removing the people from their access to natural resources, it also perpetuated an everyday informal transaction with the state in the form of bribes. So, and another way in which access to common resources is regulated, it is through denial. Denial is very different from deprivation as a mechanism. And conceptually it is very different because caste and untouchability are very tied together. Using the idea of purity pollution, Dalits are denied access to public resources. For instance, they are not allowed to drink from public water bodies. They're not allowed to use public grazing lands or public roads for that matter. And it's not really depriving them of the resources, but it's also denying them the right to have resources. So we have to understand that it's not merely deprivation, but it's a different mechanism altogether. And regulation of access to resources also manifests in the form of spatial marginalization, as we saw in the theory of broken men. I talked about it, that how broken men were occupying, how they were forced to occupy the borderlands, the margins of the society. And it's not really a thing of the past, but it continues even in the present. If you look at even in the feudal period, for instance, the agricultural workers, the serfs, they were living in huts which are built at the borders of the village. And when it comes to capitalist contemporary society, also we see the same thing happening. And untouchability still remains as the logic of urban planning. That's why we see a lot of Dalit slums in urban spaces and Dalit colonies for that matter. So, and these spaces are often characterized with a lack of resources. Often they are drought-ridden and unhygienic, and it is characterized by a lack of resources. And deprived of land, dispossessed of land, and denied the right to access resources, the only thing that the Dalits have somewhat control over is on their own bodies, which they use to enter into labor relations for their daily survival. And labor conceptually denotes a power relation, an unequal power relation, where the relationship is between the laborer and the employer who owns the means of production. So it is essentially an unequal relationship. Therefore, it assumes exploitative and expropriative characteristics. Exploitation conceptually means unequal exchange of labor. So as we saw in the case of broken men, they were given dead cattle meat instead of in return of their work. So it is clearly an unequal exchange. And when it comes to caste-based feudal relations, also we see the same kind of thing operating, where we see that the agricultural serfs who are bound or tied to the land, they are given only meager amounts of grains as their wages. And so, most of the times, this is not even considered as wage, but as the generosity of the landlord. And when we come to capitalism and the contemporary times. For instance, in the colonial economy, we see even if capitalism kind of claims to have emancipated the land-bound, labor to mobile and free labor, which can then go and enter into contractual relationship. When these people went to colonial plantations, for instance, and entered into a relation, contractual relationship, they were even that relationship was exploitative, that they were not given adequate pay. So even in capitalism, although there is an economic shift happening, it makes sure that the poor and especially the Dalits are implanted in the same exploitative material relations. And although we completely deny the existence of uh, manual scavenging in our country, sanitation work, especially manual scavenging, is exclusively done till date by the Dalits. And sanitation work, especially manual scavenging, is the most most exploitative kind of a labor relation, where you are not even, I mean, it's something beyond our comprehension, I think. I mean, it's not, they're not paid adequately most of the times, and most of the times they are not even paid. So contesting this dominant idea that manual scavenging has been abolished in our country, Divya Bharati's documentary film Kakkus, it talks about this shocking experiences of the Dalit manual scavengers who are denied, are even denied their pay, and even denied basic amenities that are so fundamentally essential for their labor. So and when we think about caste, which understands labor mostly as obligatory labor, even the idea of labor is kind of absent in this discourse, because caste in within caste system, labor is more understood as service, because each caste is assigned, I mean, is considered to be destined to do a particular labor. So the idea of labor itself is tricky when it comes to caste, and because it is presented more, or it is believed to be more as a service or a destiny. So this particular aspect facilitates the expropriation of labor. Expropriation conceptually is different from exploitation. Expropriation is unacknowledged labor and unpaid labor, and not underpaid labor. When we talk about exploitation, it is underpaid labor, whereas in expropriation, it is unpaid labor. So if you look at the caste-based enslavement regime, you see people belonging to Dalit communities who are considered as the slave caste. They were not even considered as human beings. So the slave masters could buy them, sell them. They were just objects. They were considered as objects to be transacted, and they could do anything. There is the slave owners could do anything on to these people, and they were even yoked with cattle in the field and asked to plow the field. So this kind of dehumanization happens, and in return of that labor, they're not given anything except the meager amounts of food that they get sometimes. And when we come to capitalism also, when in the contemporary times also, we see expropriation in practice. For instance, in brick lanes, for instance, we see these people enter into a contractual relationship. When they go there, they're not provided with any kind of facilities for housing or health or anything, and because their pay is very less, they have to take loans from the employer and on high rates of interest, and because their pay is less, they won't be able to pay it back either. So it continues to be a perpetual debt, and thereby a perpetual enslavement, or it binds them within that particular unequal exploitative and super exploitative relationship. Although, and also when uh, the employer realizes that the person will not be able to pay the money back, then he would uh, absorb his skin, the laborer's skin, also to the workforce, so that his family also would come and work without being paid, or without even acknowledged, that their labor goes unacknowledged. Mm. And there are like various so many instances like this. Recently recently Wire has reported Dalit women complaining against their land owner, on whose land they were working, because they were not given salary because it rained during the day and they could not complete the task. So that day's labor just goes invisible, it goes unpaid. And also, women talk about how they are forced to do sexual labor. So Dalit women, just because they are, you know, because of their circumstances, they have to be present in the workplace, in the public place. Their presence there is interpreted as their sexual accessibility and availability. So they are sexually abused and harassed by their employers or the contractors or the landowners. So that sexual labor also, is not really acknowledged or acknowledged as labor. So that labor also, gets invisibilized, or it's even denied. The idea of labor itself is denied in that cases. And so Shailaja Paik in her book The Vulgarity of Caste talks about tamasha and lavani performers, and she says again it is a ritual dance performance, an erotic dance performance which Dalit women used to perform for the dominant caste. The audience would be dominant caste, and they were subjected to a lot of sexual harassments and abuses during and after their work. And Pike says that their work is not even considered as work. Work is not even recognized as labor, but it is called as play or performance. So this kind of mechanisms are also in operation, which continuously deny the labor status itself and thereby labor rights to the people who work. And I really don't want to end this talk with this dismal picture of how caste shapes the material relations. And I think it's also important to emphasize on the resistance aspect, because Dalit, Dalits as communities, they have staged really powerful, inspiring resistance against this kind of material relations. So I would like to talk a little bit briefly about that also. And when we look at anti-caste resistance in terms of materiality, I think we need to shift from land and labor to the idea of livelihood, which would include activities to procure and preserve resources for sustenance. And it is not just for survival, which is about the bare minimum of existence, but of sustenance, which is about an enhanced living. So when I looked through various anti-caste movements, anti-caste praxis in terms of materiality, I found two kinds of resistance, where one is resistance for livelihood, where I mean the various movements, various anti-caste movements, which contest the caste-based material relations with specific demands, that Dalits come collectively and demand with specific demands, often addressed to the government or the state. That can be for better wages, that can be for recognition as workers, for their right to engage in non-caste based occupations, and it can be against entities breaking the land ceiling and illegally possessing and encroaching into land. It can be against destruction of natural resources, which it as a byproduct of this developmental programs, like various aspects it covers. And there is another aspect. Maybe I'll give an example also. Like for instance, in UP, the Bodh Gaya land movement, where the Dalits come together, they came together and they demanded a redistribution of land. So the Bodh Gaya mutts were holding, the priests were holding a lot of land, which is beyond the land ceiling limit, the legal limit. So the people came and asked the government to redistribute land. So there are so many so many anti-caste movements with different kinds of demands, which I categorized as resistance for livelihood. And there is another aspect to it, like there are communities which created an altogether new ecosystem, which is operating outside the caste system. That is their life itself, their living itself becomes a resistance. That's what I call as livelihood itself as resistance. I would like to give a concrete example, which is very dear to my heart, which is very close to my heart also. And it has inspired me so much during my field work for my research. So this is a community in a place called Manjaligiri. It is near to my hometown. So during the time of caste slavery in Kerala, the Dalits, the slave castes, they because they could not bear with the tortures of enslavement, they ran from their slave masters and they started hiding in a place. So it was a marshy island and covered with thorny plants, thorny screw pines. So these people, they came there, they removed all the thorny plants from there. They dug black soil from the nearby lake, carried it on their shoulders, and they are creating a landmass altogether. They drained saline water from the land and created fields there, and they started cultivating. So they are creating an alternate ecosystem altogether, which sustain themselves, but which enables them also to exist outside the caste economy. So this is what I call as livelihood as resistance. I think I'll stop right now here, and maybe I'll take questions if there are any questions.
Okay, thank you, Sephora. That was a pretty thought-provoking and insightful session by you. Thank you so much for sharing that information. And yeah, so with that, we can now move to our Q&A session. Before that, humble request to the audience, as much as we would like to encourage open dialogue, we request that the questions and comments remain relevant to the ongoing topic and are expressed in a constructive manner. We would like to ensure that everyone gets an opportunity to participate. This would also help us in adhering to our designated time frame. So I really appreciate everyone's cooperation in that. Yeah, we will now be taking questions from audience. I would like to request audience to either raise their hands if they're on the Zoom call or type in the chat box. We are also monitoring the YouTube live stream if you would like to post your question there. Yep.
So, Monali, I raised my hand.
Okay,
Can I
sorry.
go ahead?
Yeah, please go ahead. I don't think I can see everyone. Let me try to change my view. Yeah, sorry, Mahesh. Please go ahead with your question.
Yeah. Sephora, this is really a great talk. Learned a lot of things. Thanks for the presentation. One question. One thing I wanted to ask is, what motivated you and what brought you to work on Dalits, and particularly like this topic? I'm just interested if you had any lived experiences or like something of that sort. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the question. For me, the interest in Dalit studies started purely as an academic interest, but it did not stop there, I think. And because my research process itself, opened me to very challenging situations for me as a researcher and as a person, which demanded me to engage with Dalit communities and collect their, cultural texts. So, although it started as a academic, and with us as an academic interest, over a period of time, I think it transformed me also as a person. It transformed my understanding politically, and it was a very difficult sort of struggle also, like to engage with the people in the field, to earn their trust, uh, to have access to their texts, and also then you also start feeling responsible, and you responsible towards the, not just towards the community, but towards the society as a whole. And you start thinking about your own existence, your own privileges. So it is in that sense a huge unlearning process also, which still continues. And I think it has influenced my personal life also, in the way I understand the world around, and also the way I interact and engage with it. And also I should say that, because research is this very rigorous process. At times, we are tend to just meet the standards and the demands of the PhD process, but interacting with the people in the field and reading about various anti-caste movements and resistance practices, it constantly inspires you to do something beyond your academics. So it gives me that sort of attention, that sort of a push to rethink myself every day, and engage with the world in a renewed way politically. I think I answered your question.
Thank you, Sephora. I think next we have a question from Sagar. Sagar, please go ahead.
Can you listen me properly?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. So my question is about initially you said there is a two streams of the list studies, ideological and materialist. So my
Yeah.
question is regarding reservation debate, or the changes happening in the paradigm of reservation in Indian state. Take example of EWS reservations, so economic based reservation, so which is actually shift from caste based social justice reservation. So what you think in India, uh, this materialistic view, or we also can say the Marxian understanding of caste, so in economic terms and in economic category, does it directly or indirectly influence this reservation paradigm and shifted from caste-based social identity towards the economic-based?
Yeah. So I think I can answer your question. Huh. So first of all, in Dalit studies, whether it be materialist discourse or ideological discourse, it will not talk about reservation, and it will not support economic reservation, because the idea of reservation itself is determined on the idea of discrimination based on ascribed identity. And even if we look at it through economic reservation, through this framework of materiality, which focuses or which foregrounds the material relations, like I said in the slide where I talked about the anti-caste violence, caste-based violence, it says that individual, mobility in class terms does not really translate to caste mobility. Therefore, it cannot, and it will not, it does not support the idea of EWS. And also, this at the same, as a flip side of it, I also want to say that this framework kind of asks us to rethink the efficacy of reservation as a tool to solve caste. It does not, it's not asking to do away with reservation at all. But at the same time, it is saying that reservation is not really an absolute solution to solving caste. Because what reservation are we even talking about when the material conditions are changing, when the economic relations are changing in such a way that there is no idea of public sphere itself, or there is there is a lot of concentration of resources on private entities. What reservation are we even talking about? So the question is not really whether it supports or disagrees with reservation, but I think this framework enables us to see reservation in a more nuanced way, seeing both its positive as well as its limitations. But it in no way is it cannot be substituted with economic reservation. I think that is my answer.
Thank you, Sephora. I think next we have Dr. Bhushan. Dr. Bhushan, if you'd like to go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Monali and Sephora. That was very informative. My question is around the mindset of the oppressed. I have a hypothesis or maybe a thought process that because of the repetitive and generational oppression, I think our psyche has been adopted to not to prefer have any property or maybe satisfy ourselves or maybe yourselves or everyone with the meager resources. I'm not talking about a person, a generational paradigm, psychological uh, and comfortability. I just wondered, I know everyone wishes to have good life as well as a wealth, but over a period of generations, and because of the repetitive insults or maybe this oppression, you tend to be comfortable with what you have or maybe not to fight anymore. Did you find this anywhere in your research? Sorry if I'm not understanding your scope of the research or maybe your area of interest. Apologies in advance. If that's of any importance, do you suggest any solutions to break this side? Because I can clearly, or I personally, I mean to say, apologies if it's not matching with your research, is that clearly there is a difference between the psychological approach of the interest about the having a wealth between the untouchable and the upper caste. Thank you.
In response to this question, I would like to say that every oppressive institution, whether it be caste or gender or patriarchy or any oppressive institution, is not merely operating through force, but it also manufactures consent. So, in other words, in theoretical terms, it operates through hegemony also, that it tries to get consent from the oppressed. So, in terms of caste, also, caste has been continuing so powerfully, also because of this, that it has been able to create some kind of hegemony, some kind of consent, or as you said, this kind of mental or psychological subservience. It has been able to because of the intergenerational way of exploitation and oppression. But more importantly, I would like to say that simultaneously throughout history we have numerous instances of resistance where people belonging to subjugated sections, whether it be caste or any other oppressive institution for that matter. Again, there have been attempts to challenge that. That's why I ended my presentation with the idea of resistance, because across history we see a lot of that. So I don't think, I mean, I'm not denying that there is hegemony operating, but if we are seeing hegemony, then we also need to see the resistance, which is also simultaneously happening, constantly trying to critically engage and challenge the system. So that is what I think.
Yes,
And
thank you.
in my research, and since you asked about my research, of course, because I am working more on anti-caste communities, so they're fundamentally anti-caste. So their fundamental characteristic itself is anti-caste. I am seeing more of resistance than consent there, because there is constant effort, in ideological terms, there is constant effort to create this Dalit consciousness. And in material terms, it constantly, claims land redistribution. It tries to create a community, create social relationships of care. So on both ideological and material fronts, the communities that I work on, there is constantly an effort to challenge caste, because it comes from the understanding that caste is not merely ideological or material. It is the mutual relation, mutual constitutiveness of these two that allows the perpetration of caste. So I am seeing more of resistance than consent. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with you that, sir, I forgot to mention or acknowledge that the resistance part of the whole question. I completely apologize and also acknowledge that it exists. I think what my curiosity is that if that resistance is there, then it should move like a revolution, French Revolution, like, untouchable revolution and completely wiping out the upper caste, which as we all see that it's not happening. Of course, it's a relative description that resistance versus the acceptance or the being staying and at a lower realm. But
If
thank
I
you.
may ask you, then what do you mean by a revolution? Like,
What I mean to say, the resistance at a massive level, resistance at a unprecedented level, that it wipes out completely that what we are unhappy with. That's what I meant.
yeah.
Of course, it is there. I completely agree. But if you look at a larger population, and if you look at an overall situation, as you shown in some of the pictures, that it is a lot of oppression is still being happening as we speak. I know it's only, as I said, it's only relative comparison. There is no figures or the data to say that this is more or this is less, but it's been happening for the many centuries, but it's still there happening. If that's the resistance, the psyche has to change, it should lead to a substantive change that won't happen again, or at least a substantive change that the oppression becomes a minority, which is not the fact as we see today.
Hey, Mona, sorry, go ahead, Sephora.
I think I think we have to understand political processes as gradual processes also. I mean, and it is not really a consistent in the sense in terms of its degree. It may not be consistent throughout. I mean, there would be specific moments in history when we see the intensity and the momentum of the movement is much more, and there would be instances or moments where the momentum is comparatively low. But this is, I mean, all this is part of the political process, and and I think even the slow, even if the degree of the momentum of the resistance is low, it matters to the larger project. I think to the larger project of annihilating caste, and so I feel like it's all a step towards that radical revolution that you are talking about. And it is a slow process. I don't think even a revolution is not really something which happens in that sense, like in overnight or in a bit of a moment. It does not happen. Like, it is something which is built. It's a very slow process, and then with the hope that we will achieve that that vision someday. But even then, I think the vision also keeps on evolving and the process continues. So yeah,
it does. Thank
and
you.
in other
Thank
words,
you.
the way, I mean, the meaning of annihilation of caste itself would change according to times, according to the change in time. So I think it's a slow and gradual process. It's a journey, and not really in that sense, yeah, a destination.
Thank you.
Which
Appreciate
will
that.
keep on happening. Yeah.
Thanks, Sephora, for answering that. Sanjay sir, did you have something to say, or I have
Yeah,
next?
just I wanted to ask Dr. Posham, who has asked these questions, correct? So he said that there is a mental barrier on the people from the Dalit side or the oppressed people to accumulate the wealth or basically generate the materialistic approach. So is it based on certain studies that this particular assumption is made, or whether it is because these people don't have any avenues to accumulate the wealth, that's why they could not accumulate, but the people who had the avenues, and still they don't want to accumulate the avenue because of this mentality. That is what I want to understand here. Because earning or accumulating the wealth is always the fundamental aspect of any human being. They just wanted to accumulate the wealth or any materialistic thing. But Dr. Posham is saying that it is means these people have the barrier, especially from the Dalit community and all this. So why that is happening, that is what I wanted to understand from him. And then subsequently, if Sephora can throw some light on that.
Thank you. Sorry if I wasn't clear in my question. Is that how we think and how we act or live is a culmination of multifactorial effect that, what you see at your home and the community, and also the being given access, or they are able to accumulate your health, or whatever the resistance that you're getting from. What my question is mainly focused on, that how the untouchables are seeing themselves on par with the other colleagues or the society, the approach and in living their life, as well as the progressive ideology that they want to accumulate wealth or go to school or go to university, is been over generations, has been affect the net result. What we're seeing today is because of the generational oppression, is the end result of generational oppression. That's what my focus is. Sorry, my comments are not based on any of the research or any of the studies, but I'm just asking, for this thinking loud, that is there any solutions to it that we can think of, just like unleashing their potential, or maybe liberating from them this mental psyche by providing education and making them self-sustainable or self employment, and then that changes, at least not in their generation, but in the, generations to come, 2 or 3 generations, at least in a particular family unit I'm talking.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Posham.
Okay, thank you, Sanjay sir and Dr. Bhushan. Next, we have Priya with a question. Priya, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sephora, for this presentation. It's very insightful. You have given all the information on how the people have been suffering, and based on that, I understand that we need reservation, and I totally support it. But my question is, however, do you believe that reservations are necessary for every subsequent generation? Like, for instance, if a particular generation has achieved significant economic prosperity and a social advancement, do you advocate for their continued dependence on reservations?
I think I mean, I don't know if I should support it or not, but what I'm saying is that I think I will support it, because the idea of reservation is not talking about class mobility, because even when Ambedkar asked for separate electorate but got with reservation, the idea was not to reservation is not really to solve, it is not a poverty alleviation program, for instance. It is to address the discrimination based on ascribed identity. So it is a given identity based discrimination that is contested in reservation. So even if individuals or individual families or groups get economic mobility, it does not really translate into caste mobility. That's what I have also said in the slide where I talked about caste atrocity with the example of Khairlanji. And in Khairlanji, you see that, like, they, as an individual family, they had land, they had economic mobility, but what happened to them? It did not really translate into social mobility. That's why they were attacked, right? So they're subject to this kind of, so that because of that, we can say that economic mobility in itself is not really, it cannot undermine the importance of reservation, because reservation is actually made for a different cause. Of course, it has limitations, but as a policy, I think its validity will remain.
That totally makes sense to me. Thank you for answering.
Thank you, Sephora. I am not seeing any more questions. Sanjay, so please let me know if I
Sorry,
missed anyone.
I have a question, Priya. Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
go
sir.
ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's excellent educational talk. So I have one question. Okay, so we bump into all these naysayers. They deny the existence of caste. This generation, they say that, oh, there is no caste. So you see that in the alumni groups, you see that in the classmates groups. And how to educate these ignorant people that there is caste exists, there is a discrimination happening in workplaces, lunch meetings. How do we educate? Like how to, educate? We have to educate these people, avoiding any, offensive discussions. How to educate? Just can you give us some pointers?
And honestly, I am also very puzzled by people, saying that there is no caste in in and around us, because whatever I see, it has been informed by caste. And and if there are people who say that, maybe you can tell them to read newspapers. Whichever newspaper you read, at least one news you will see about caste. And I mean, the only thing that one can do in order to rescue themselves from this kind of ignorance is to start talking to more people, start engaging with more knowledge in that sense, which come from this kind of the non-mainstream sort of knowledge, which will talk about oppression and exploitation. And if one really wants to know whether it is there or not, they can definitely see it. But if one doesn't want to see it, then I don't know how to help them. But yeah, if one wants to see it, there are a lot of evidences right in front of our eyes, that which we can't really even ignore. That kind of obvious things are there. Maybe you can talk about manual scavenging, which is done exclusively by Dalits, or the caste atrocities for that matter. Like, there are so many things that happening, and these are like the most obvious, undeniable sort of examples, if you're trying to convince somebody. But whatever you do, even I mean, for instance, even when I look at my mess in the hostel, we see vegetarian and non-vegetarian tables, and even that implies that caste is there. Otherwise, why do we need to have these sort of things? So everything is shaped by caste, and whether you see it or not, and it's a different question. If you want to see it, you have all the opportunities and options to understand that it exists. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Just point them to the realities on the ground. Thank you so much. Yep.
Thank you, Sephora. I think next we had Sanjay Sir's hands up.
Yeah, I think before that, you can take the question from the chat, Monali. PB has a
I
question.
think like after you, Kaustubh raised his hand. So Kaustubh, if you'd like to go first, then I'll take over, like point out the chat question.
Oh, correct. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you for a very nice presentation. It was quite insightful. And I had another linked question with basically unpacking this idea of Dalit. So especially in the case of Maharashtra, when you look at Dalits, there's vast material inequality between subcastes visible. For example, when you compare Matang community with Mahars versus the Chamars. And this economic inequality, material inequality, is also linked to the kind of caste-based occupations that they had in the past. For example, in the village economy, Mahars did own very small portions of land, right? While the Matangs didn't, and they were also nomadic, and they were also, faced, pretty much, exploitation under the colonial system, through, the what is it? I forgot the name of the. Yeah, basically they were labeled as criminal tribes, due to which their mobility was, severely restricted. And when you look at the current situation, you see a lot of these historical inequalities, economic, inequalities manifesting even today in vast differences between the materiality of the material conditions of these caste groups. Now, the question that I have is that when you link emancipation, I mean, one form of economic emancipation as climbing up the economic ladder, as uh, something which is also in line with becoming wealthy, accumulating wealth, right? And wealth is also something which is based on your ability uh, to work alongside the capitalist order. What you are also seeing in the field realities is the differences between these subcastes is increasing, where the upper castes within the Dalit communities get a kind of caste character where they're able to accumulate wealth and so on, and land up becoming exploiters of the lower caste groups, right? And these inter caste dynamics within the Dalit community are resulting in tremendous turmoil, which also links to the question of, okay, why is there no overall, Dalit movement emerging? Because of this consistent fragmentation rooted in the material inequality. So, largely, I'm quite curious to see in your research context, have you noticed this? And what is your take on unpacking this aspect of, the material inequality, bringing up questions of ideology and so on and so forth? How would you approach it?
So it's a very, very important question. And it comes from the understanding of caste as a graded structure, and that's why I talked about the structure of caste and the manifestation of caste as graded hierarchy, and that is that is why caste survives many centuries, because it is so divisive that it divides. Even the Dalits are divided in terms of their caste identities. They're divided into numerous subcastes, so that it disallows any kind of solidarity even among the oppressed. So when we understand, of course there are differences in degrees of their material inequality, but ultimately we have to, when it comes to a praxis, anti-caste praxis, we have to understand that first of all, Dalits and the poor. The Dalits have to ally with the poor, and the poor have to ally with the Dalits. And first of all, that solidarity has to be made, that class solidarity has to be made without really overlooking the social aspect of caste. Because even when that solidarity is based on class lines, one has to understand that it is not really a very neat solidarity. It is further divided into various constituencies based on the caste positionalities. So even when one calls for class solidarity in order to challenge the unequal material relationships, one has to understand that it's a very heterogeneous group again, which is constituted by different constituencies located differently in the social and economic relationships. So it has to happen on both ends simultaneously. That I think that is the answer to that. I mean, in terms of praxis, but conceptually, yeah, of course, because caste is a graded hierarchy, as you said, it fundamentally divides each caste into various subcastes and disallows any kind of solidarity, and thereby inhibits any kind of resistance against the system, so that the system continues intact. I think I answered your question. Did I answer your question?
I mean, but just a follow-up. I'm just wondering because so the issue of solidarity across caste lines is linked to ideology, but at the same time, solidarity across caste lines is also linked to ideology. So the material question and the ideological question seem to, I mean, this is like the classic debate which the Marxists also raised, that, why is there no unified proletariat? Because there is caste, right? But at the same time, why is there no caste solidarity? Because there is class. So this tension between ideology and materiality, how do you link it to issues of resistance, right? That's the heart of what I'm trying to understand.
That is a very difficult political question to resolve, but I have developed most of this understanding from Teltumde's work, and Teltumde suggests this as the praxis where there is simultaneous recognition of material and ideological forces operating, and then we have to, the oppressed the exploited and the materially disadvantaged have to come together by recognizing how ideologically they are, coming from different positions, or not ideologically, maybe socially they are from different positions. So that's why, Ambedkar also, when the textile mill strike happened in Maharashtra, this was the problem, that when there was a class issue, they came together. But after that, uh, bec- because they were, from different caste groups, they could not unite. So the movement itself kind of dissolved. So as a in terms of praxis, both have to go hand in hand. Otherwise, and when we say both have to go hand in hand, we are acknowledging the ideological and the material and the complicated relationship between the two. So if you don't grapple with both simultaneously, then the anti-caste project also kind of, gets limited.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thanks a lot. Yeah, wonderful presentation. Yeah, keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sephora.
Manali, sorry to jump in here, but I'm Venkat Maroju. Can I add to this topic? It's an important question raised, Manali.
Yeah, sure, Venkat, go ahead.
Yeah. So I completely agree with earlier. I didn't get his name, but yes, caste as such a powerful and resilient influence that even divides the oppressed, and that is actually now the biggest challenge anybody wants to build a anti-caste movement across these oppressed sections is the caste itself is dividing them. Okay, and this is now more prominent in a place like Telugu states we come from. Most of our Telugu friends know this. What he just said in Maharashtra, it is to the even extreme proportions. We have this Mala Madiga caste divide to the extent everywhere it shows up, and somebody who is working in an Ambedkarite movement, it's a reality that you face this every step of the way, and there is a demand for some of this categorization, and also you have seen just last week there was a big Supreme Court hearing. See, there is all the learned who have come up, and we have of course used reservations at certain level, have to really grow up, and the same privilege that you didn't have, now you have. And how do we pass this privilege to some other people, right? I mean, it takes a lot to do that, but that is the need of the hour. And in a state like Andhra Pradesh, like we are united Andhra Pradesh now, two Telugu states, we have about 25% of OBC reservation they introduced in late 70s. The one of the because it's a big mass spectrum of people are there. There are OBC candidates who are, some castes, they're even like their situation is worse than some of the Dalit communities there. And then there are communities which are really landholders, and they are very close to the dominant caste Hindus. So this spectrum, the way they have done is they have categorized into ABCD, and never had issues. Now I look back, what happened in the last 40 years.
Venkat, we can't hear you.
Venkat, you are breaking.
Yeah.
Some level of categorization
Venkat,
would solve it for all, but until that happens, yeah. Can you?
Your
Hello?
voice.
I think we lost you in between. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm actually driving. So apologies. So that is, I strongly recommend that. Just somewhere we have to all grow up and absorb this reality among us and accept that. So that's my comment more than anything. Thank you, Manali.
Thanks a lot, Venkat, for jumping in and contributing for that. Sephora, I would like to move to the next question. This is from PB. You talked about resources being in the hands of few. Anti-caste movements and movements against privatization, land grab have to come together. Are you seeing this on the ground? Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yeah, I'm just reading it.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. I could not really talk about it in the presentation because I was more focused on the materiality of caste in terms of how caste influences or how caste shapes material relations. But yeah, if you look at resistance, definitely, we see the people on the ground contesting, corporate giants. I'll give you a very inspiring example from my own place. I'm coming from Kerala. So one of the anti-caste resistance movements in Kerala is called Chengara struggle, where you sorry, I just sorry. I meant to say Plachimada struggle, not Chengara. So Plachimada struggle, which was a resistance movement mounted by the people of the place called Plachimada against a US-based, Atlanta-based Coca-Cola company. So when this company came and started, with the government's support, with a license, they started this company in Plachimada. The it resulted in the deterioration of the quality of the land. And it kind of manifested it created problems with people to the people who were living there. So they started having diseases because they were drinking polluted water. So we see the people of Plachimada coming together, and they are sitting on a hunger strike, and this for some time, and they continued to do the strike against the government, and they even went on a legal battle against the US-based company, and finally they won the battle. They forced the government, they demanded the government to cancel the company's license. So this kind of that's why I said these anti-caste movements are so inspiring that you can't even comprehend the kind of the determination and will that these people have shown through their resistances, that absolutely keeping everything at stake, every aspect of their living at stake. They go for resistance against these kind of exploitative and discriminatory structures. So absolutely, if you start looking at the discourse of anti-caste resistance, we see them understanding also. Even the community that I study, particularly focusing on my research, we see a lot of resistance against the colonial establishment altogether, because it kind of emerged in the early 20th century. It is challenging various aspects of the colonial administration, colonialism altogether. So yeah, you see people on the ground challenging various massive forces of capitalism. You see that.
Thank you, Sephora, for answering that. I would like to move to the next question. This is from Jomal George. I would also read it out for everyone's convenience. What is your take on the demand for caste census and proportionate representation?
Yeah, recently we have been reading, and I mentioned about the study group in the beginning. So recently we have been reading about Bihar caste survey, and caste surveys are important, but important in understanding the proportion and in whatever representation that the government is now promising to give. The caste survey in itself is important, but then we also have to think that how that survey is being done. For instance, recently we discussed about Bihar caste survey, and even the survey data, when we analyzed, even the land question was absent. Like the question, how much land people have, even that was absent in a caste survey, which is like how do we even understand that as a caste survey? I don't know. But then, yeah, again, when we talk about representation, what representation are we talking about? Now we identify a lot of poor, poor or people, communities at disadvantaged positions, and the government is also claiming to give more reservation. But when the public share itself is dwindling, the economy is getting largely privatized, representation itself becomes a joke, right? So that is my understanding of your question. Answer to your question. I hope I answered, Jomal.
Thanks, Sephora. Sanjay, so we have one more question in the chat. Would you like me to take that over?
Yeah,
or...
go ahead. Yeah, they are the priority. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll read out loud the question. Does your research explore casteism beyond Hinduism? And if so, how does the intersectionality of casteism and belonging to minority religions impact the lives of those experiencing it? Additionally, what insights can be gleaned regarding the political representations achieved by individuals navigating this intersection? This is by the judge.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yes, my research talks about a caste within Christianity. So it is, in that sense, talking about caste within minority religion. I think I can't see the question. I would like to see the question again.
Divya, if you're fine, I'll post the question again in the chat for everyone's visibility, if that's fine. Or I can actually just direct message you this. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so so the community that I study, it is a community that, basically the Dalit converts to Christianity. They break away from Christianity because they continue to endure caste discrimination in Christianity. Although Christianity promised them redemption and equality in the eyes of God or in the eyes of human beings, effectively, socially, it did not really translate into reality. So they moved out of Christianity and formed their own Dalit religions. I'll just go to the question again because I don't think I understood. Yeah, but at the same time, it's important to also understand that Christianity has, or colonialism and the missionary evangelism have helped the Dalits to attain some kind of mobility. Because when these people converted to Christianity, they were given missionary education, English education was given, which allowed them to, get into non-caste-based occupations. That is there, but it has a flip side also, because discrimination continued and socially, that even within the church, they were discriminated spatially and socially. So you see different kinds of engagements. Like, for instance, some people move out of Christianity to challenge Christianity and the caste within Christianity, whereas some people make use of the avenues that are created within the context of Christianity and use that to challenge caste. So it happens either way. But yeah, I mean, I am looking at the intersection between Christianity and caste also in my research.
This forum.
And also, I think I would like to add one more thing. And it's important to understand that when, at least in the text that I have looked at, it's unlike Brahmanical Hinduism, which is, which is epistemically, or its theology itself is justifying caste, it legitimizing caste, which is not the case when it comes to Christianity, because it is more like a social discrimination rather than, epistemically itself, it does not really, or theologically, it does not really sanction or legitimize discrimination. But because Christianity has to, as an institution, because Christianity has to gain power in the subcontinent, it was indigenized, and in that process of indigenization, it adopted elements from or caste into it and incorporated caste into it, but more manifested in terms of the social rather than the theological.
Thank you, Sephora. Sanjay sir, would you like to go next?
Okay, great. Thank you. So thank you, Sephora, for basically accepting our invitations when I approach you to give the
It's my
lecture on
pleasure.
Ambedkar Lecture Series. You were basically a little bit disturbed because something was going on in the IIT. 3 students, I believe, committed suicide. And still, when we saw your presentation, it was created very professionally. You put a lot of efforts in putting these presentations, and your answers shows the maturity of your knowledge, and the way you responded to each and every questions were very thoroughly studied. So thank you very much, and I hope this particular we learned a lot. And at the same time, whatever the questions you have come across might have helped you or may help you in your presentations or your PhD. That is one thing. I have just one small question. So when you are showing your slide, there was a slide on exploitation versus expropriation. I believe I got that word correct.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I believe this exploitation had some legal safeguards in place. But what about the expropriation? Does have anything? It is covered something in the legally, or it is how we can safeguard the people against those type of expropriations?
I really haven't thought about it in the legal, how it is, discussed, and I haven't really engaged with the legal discourse of it. But I think since I was talking more in terms of labor when I talked about exploitation and expropriation, there are labor laws which talk about it. But these kind of, one of the problems with, and I don't know any law which actually, because it cannot really talk about expropriation, right? Because it is something which is invisibilized. But at the same time, there are laws which are, for instance, against sexual harassment at workplace, but the precondition is that you have to understand something as a workplace in order to talk about prevention of sexual harassment at workplace. But in certain contexts where even the idea of work is negated, how do we talk about protection, or how do we talk about labor rights? So that is the problem with expropriation. Like it's much worse, I think, where I haven't really thought about it in detail. So this is my immediate response. Maybe it is a little naive at this point, but yeah.
Fully understood. Yeah.
And also when even when law addresses sexual harassment, it does not really understand the complexity that caste brings into it. So that's why, for instance, when sex work was banned, or when the bar dancers controversy came, the problem, the state banned bar dancing altogether, saying that it would perpetrate immorality in the society. But then the problem is that the law is blind towards how caste shapes this particular profession, and how the sexual labor of women are sometimes exploited and expropriated also. And there, I think we see exploitation and expropriation coming together. But whether, I'm not sure whether there are laws which directly address expropriation. Right now, I can't come up with anything. I can't think of it. But I think one problem with law, even when it talks about exploitation, is that it does not really understand the dynamics of caste, which shapes and transforms the exploitation itself. So in the case of the bar dancers, they asked for alternate employment instead of banning. I mean, because the state was happy just banning bar dancing. But then they say that if you have to then provide us alternate employment, otherwise, what is the point, right? And it's not about morality. It is about our survival. It's about our daily, earning and our livelihood. So you have to provide us alternate occupations. So, I mean, it's a complicated thing, which even the law is not really careful about the dynamics of caste. But yeah, I will think about the expropriation and how law addresses that aspect. I haven't really thought of it, so I don't know about it at this point. Sorry about it.
Oh, you said nicely. So thank you. Yeah.
May I ask a question? I'm unable to type it. If you allow me, I would like to speak.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. Sephora, this occurred to me while you were speaking about caste in relation to Christianity. You said that even though the theology of Christianity does not allow for caste and caste discrimination, when it enters a society like India's, it is forced to accommodate caste in order to gain legitimacy and power. And then I thought back to your material analysis of caste, and I was particularly struck by the last sentence that you ended your talk with, in which you used the terms caste economy. It's simple, but it encapsulates so much because it characterizes the whole economic structure in a certain way. And then I came back to what you said about Christianity, and I thought if the economy of a place itself is organized in a certain way, if caste is the organizational structure of it, if the economy itself is a caste economy, then how does any religion whose theology may not have place for it, find a place or operate in that society without accommodating caste or without accepting caste? It's not just about gaining legitimacy. It's actually about how how you get it. Okay.
I understand. I think I understand it, and I completely agree with you. And thank you for that correction. Yeah, because as an institution, it also needs material. It is embedded in material relations, and in order to gain, power, in order to gain power, because it is always connected to material power also. So it has to depend on, the landed communities and the dominant in that sense. Yeah. So I completely understand and completely agree with you. And thank you so much for that correction.
Yes, and I think religion by itself cannot offer an alternative economic structure. It has to work with the relations of production that
religion is
at a
primarily
given
an ideological structure. That's.
Sephora, we have something along the lines of Sanjay sir's point from PB. Expropriation could also be related to the bonded labor and what we see in prostituted women. Question.
I'm not really able to see the question.
Okay, let me just send it directly to you today.
Expropriation. I think bonded labor and prostitution are two different things, but I think expropriation is definitely there in bonded labor. I mean, I don't know if I mentioned that in my talk. Bonded labor is effectively, I mean, theoretically, it is super exploitative.
Hello, Sephora, can you hear me? I think we lost you. We'll just wait a few minutes. Maybe she has a bad connection.
I texted her. Oh, there she is.
Sorry, I think my internet is a little unstable.
Are you able to hear me properly?
Yeah,
Okay,
you are able
so
to hear me?
yes, yeah, please go ahead. Can you still see the questions from chat, or would you like me to send it over to you again?
Yeah.
Okay,
Could you
okay.
send it?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can't.
yeah. I'll send it over again.
Yeah, I think in my talk I talked about both bonded labor and sexual, exploitation and expropriation. So I think I talked in detail about various instances where sexual labor, whether it be prostitutes or, Dalit women workers in the workplace, how their sexual labor is not it's not actually exploited but expropriated rather than exploitation. And sometimes for instance, I talked about the erotic performance called lavani and tamasha, where we see a change in the dynamics across history, because it started as a ritual performance, but when capitalism came, the performance got commodified. But even there, the idea of expropriation is not really going away, because they are, at times they're exploited within the capitalist wage relations, as well as because of their caste and particular profession. They're also sexually harassed, and their sexual labor is also used by the dominant caste. So there is an idea of expropriation also happening. So even when, in the case of prostitutes also, I think it's the same. They are as prostitutes, even when they are, in exploitative relationship, their labor is simultaneously expropriated also by the same people and by the same people. Did I make sense? I don't know if I answered that question correctly, but yeah.
Hi, Bibi.
I think I talked about bonded labor and sexual labor and how it expropriates labor. But again, these are not really, watertight compartments, or one is exploitation and one is expropriation. At times we see both happening in terms of the same, context, in terms of the same profession or labor. So definitely it is there. Expropriation is there in bonded labor as well as sexual labor, and when it is informed by caste.
Okay, thanks, Sephora. Hope PB, hope you were satisfied with the answer. I don't see any more raised hands. So if anyone would like to kind of ask any questions directly, please feel free to do so. I think we can wait for a few more minutes.
Yeah, Monali, I think we can close now. Sephora is answering for almost 60 minutes now. I'm counting. So.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Sephora, for so patiently answering all the questions. So I think we can wrap up our Q&A session here. As I know, thank you everyone in the audience for joining us today. Your attentive present and active participation added success to this lecture series. And on behalf of BSG, I would like to thank you, Sephora, for your time, your
Thank you so much
insightful.
for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for sharing such a wealth of knowledge with all of us here.
Thank you for having me with you. I really, really enjoyed and learned a lot from this discussion, especially. Thank you for all the people who asked me questions and gave me corrections. I really learned a lot. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. So yeah, with that, we can conclude today's lecture. Hope the lecture was as fruitful for everyone here. So yeah, see you all in the next lecture and have a nice weekend, everyone. Back to you, Sanjay sir.
Thank you.